Have you ever reached a point where every door you knocked on stayed shut, where prayers felt unanswered, dreams felt denied, and every direction seemed like a dead end? What if I told you, that's not rejection, that's redirection? Because sometimes when God closes every door, it's not to keep you out, it's to lead you to Himself. There was a time in my life when I thought everything was falling apart. Doors that once opened easily now slammed shut. Opportunities vanished. Friends disappeared. Every plan I made failed. I cried out, Lord, what are you doing? Why are you closing every door? But in the silence of my confusion, something holy began to happen. The Lord wasn't ignoring me. He was inviting me closer. He wasn't punishing me. He was preparing me, you see. Sometimes God must close every earthly door to show you the one heavenly door that truly matters. The one that leads not to success, not to comfort, but to Him. And if you've ever wondered why your prayers seem delayed, why life seems unfair, or why heaven seems silent, stay with me. Because before this message ends, you'll see that every closed door is a divine compass pointing straight to the heart of God. When God begins to close doors in your life, it can feel confusing, even painful. You start to wonder if you did something wrong, if maybe your faith wasn't enough, or if somehow you missed His will along the way. You pray and it feels like heaven is silent. You plan and everything falls apart. But I want to tell you, God's silence does not mean His absence, and His closed doors do not mean His rejection. What feels like divine distance is often divine direction. There are seasons when the Lord begins to shut down opportunities, relationships, and pathways that once brought you joy, not because He's withholding something from you, but because He's preparing something better for you. When God shuts a door, it's not an accident. It's an act of love wrapped in mystery. We look at the door, the opportunity that's gone, and we cry, "Why, Lord? Why would you take this away from me?" But God looks at that same door and says, "Because I saw what you could not see. I saw what waited beyond that path, and I love you too much to let you walk through it." Many times we only see the door, God sees the destination. You may think that door was your breakthrough, but God knows it was your breakdown waiting to happen. You see, closed doors are not God's punishment. They are His protection. He closes doors to guard your destiny. You might have been heading toward a place that would have stolen your peace, drained your spirit, or destroyed your purpose. But because the Lord knows the end from the beginning, He steps in and begins to block what you thought was meant for you. That's why the Bible says in Proverbs, "A man's heart plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps." You may have planned the door, but God planned your preservation. There are times in life when you have to trust that a no from God is safer than a yes from man. When you live by faith, you understand that not every opportunity is a blessing and not every open door is divine. Some doors are traps dressed up as treasures. Some doors open easily, not because God made a way, but because the enemy knows what waits behind it will delay your calling. But when God closes the door, it's His way of saying, that's not where your anointing will grow. He shuts what will stunt your faith, so that He can open what will strengthen your future. Sometimes God will allow you to walk up to the door, to knock, to wait, and to feel the sting of it not opening, because He wants to teach you trust. Trust is not proven in abundance, it's proven in absence. When nothing moves, when no opportunity presents itself, when the door won't open no matter how hard you pray, that's when your faith matures. Closed doors train your spirit to depend on God instead of outcomes. They teach you that your life is not sustained by open opportunities, but by obedience to His voice. Think of Joseph. God gave him a dream of greatness, yet every door seemed to close after that. Betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, wrongfully imprisoned, every step of his journey was another door shut tight. But those very doors were the map to his destiny. The pit led to Potiphar's house. Potiphar's house led to the prison. The prison led to the palace. If any door had opened earlier, Joseph would have missed the one God designed for him. Closed doors are not the end of the story. They are the hidden chapters of your preparation. There's a truth the mature believer must learn. God's direction often disguises itself as disappointment. You may cry over what's closing, but heaven rejoices because it knows what's coming. You see, God's strategy always looks backward in the moment, but makes perfect sense in the future. Right now, it may seem like everything is working against you, but later you'll look back and say, "Thank God that door didn't open." The Lord never denies what is meant for you. He only delays it until you're ready to carry it. So many people give up in the hallway between doors. They lose faith because they think God has forgotten them. But listen, the hallway is not punishment, it's positioning. That's where your character is built, your patience is refined, and your spirit learns to listen instead of rush. When every door shuts, God's strategy is to draw your attention upward. He wants you to stop staring at doors and start seeking direction. He wants you to stop asking for keys and start trusting His timing. Sometimes you'll knock, and the door won't open because God doesn't want you to enter yet. You're still being shaped for what's on the other side. If the door opened too early, your blessing would become a burden. God is not denying you, He's developing you. You can't see it now, but while you're waiting, He's working. He's preparing people, places, and seasons that will fit perfectly when His timing arrives. When He finally says, "Now," every previous no will make sense. There are moments when God will even let others walk through doors that you've been praying for, not to discourage you, but to test your trust. Can you rejoice when someone else walks into the opportunity you wanted? Because if you can celebrate their open door, you prove that you trust God's hand in your own life. Comparison will make you think your door is broken when it's simply being built. God doesn't use recycled doors. He designs one specifically for your destiny. You must also remember that Satan can open doors too. That's why discernment is more valuable than desire. You can't chase every opportunity. You must pray, "Lord, is this you?" Because sometimes the devil will give you a door that leads to distraction just to delay your calling. But the Spirit of God within you will whisper, "Wait." When you obey that whisper, even when you don't understand, that's when you step into maturity. The true test of faith isn't in walking through an open door. It's in staying still when none will open. And while you wait, God is teaching you the rhythm of trust. You learn that His no is as holy as His wise. You start to see that closed doors push you deeper into prayer, deeper into worship, deeper into surrender. You stop asking why and start saying, "What? Lord, what are you teaching me here? What are you shaping in me through this?" Because every closed door comes with a lesson, and every lesson carries a seed for the next season. There will be moments when the silence feels heavy, when your heart aches for movement, and your mind questions if God has forgotten your name. But He hasn't. He's standing on the other side of that closed door, preparing what you cannot yet handle. He's aligning hearts, timing, and resources. He's building your faith until it's strong enough to hold what's coming. Because when God finally opens the right door, you'll realize why the others had to stay shut. So when the doors start closing, don't panic. Don't force them open. Don't chase what God has already released you from. Instead, rest in the confidence that your Father's strategy is perfect. What He shuts, no man can open, and what He opens, no man can shut. Closed doors don't signal the end of God's plan. They signal the beginning of His divine strategy unfolding in your life. When every door in your life closes, something sacred begins to unfold beneath the surface. It's not chaos, it's calling. God begins to whisper in the silence, "Come closer." You may not hear Him at first because disappointment can be loud, and pain can echo through every corner of your soul. You might be crying over what you lost, wondering why nothing is working, why everyone seems distant, why your prayers sound hollow. But that's the moment when heaven leans in. God is not pushing you away. He's pulling you into His presence. You see, God doesn't just desire your obedience. He desires your intimacy. And sometimes, the only way He can have all of you is to close everything else around you. There are seasons when God will intentionally remove every distraction so that He can reveal Himself. The closed doors aren't punishment. They're preparation for deeper communion. The Lord knows that as long as your heart is full of noise, you won't hear His whisper. As long as you're chasing what you think you need, you'll never discover what you truly crave Him. The door to intimacy with God rarely opens in comfort. It opens in stillness. And stillness often comes when you have nowhere else to go but His presence. When every door in life shuts, it's as if God has built a private sanctuary just for you and Him. The world calls it isolation, but heaven calls it invitation. Think about how many times we only pray when life falls apart. When things are good, we give God moments. When things are broken, we give Him our hearts. He knows this about us. That's why sometimes He'll allow what we depend on to fail, not because He's cruel, but because He's jealous for our attention. When the job ends, when the friendship fades, when the door closes, He's saying, "Now I can have you to myself." The same God who blessed you is the same God who longs to walk with you. But He won't compete with your distractions. He loves you enough to strip away the noise until you can finally hear His heartbeat again. It's in these quiet, doorless seasons that you begin to experience the side of God you never knew. You stop treating Him like a destination and start treating Him like a companion. You stop praying for Him to fix things and start asking Him to fill you. You learn that His presence is not just a place you visit on Sunday, it's a home you can dwell in daily. The longer you stay in that secret place, the more you realize that intimacy with God isn't built on answers. It's built on awareness. The awareness that He's near, even when life feels empty. The awareness that He's listening even when He's not speaking. The awareness that His silence is not rejection, but reflection. He's waiting for your heart to align with His. There's a holy shift that happens when you stop asking God to open doors and start asking Him to open your heart. The moment you make that shift, the closed doors stop feeling like loss and start feeling like lessons. You begin to see that God wasn't blocking your path. He was blessing your soul. He was teaching you dependence. He was teaching you to value His presence more than His provision. You start to say, "Lord, if all I have is You, that's enough." And that's the moment when peace enters. Because intimacy with God doesn't remove the storm. It calms the storm inside of you. You remember how the disciples panicked in the boat when the waves rose and the wind howled. They cried out, "Lord, don't You care that we perish?" And Jesus stood, spoke to the storm, and then turned to them and said, "Where is your faith?" The real storm that night wasn't around them. It was within them. The same happens in us. When everything around us is shaking, God is trying to bring us to the place where we can sleep in the boat with Him. That's intimacy. That's trust. That's peace. And it's often birthed in the moments when every other door has closed and all you have left is Him. When God pulls you into intimacy, He begins to reveal Himself in ways that no sermon, no song, no experience could ever capture. You start to feel His presence in ordinary moments, in the quiet of the morning, in the tears that fall during prayer, in the stillness that wraps around your spirit. The same presence that once seemed far away becomes your closest companion. You start to talk to Him like a friend. You start to lean on Him like a father. You begin to feel what it means to truly walk with God, not just believe in Him. And it's there, in that quiet space, that revelation begins to flow. You begin to hear His voice clearly. The Word comes alive again. Scriptures that once felt distant suddenly speak straight to your situation. You start realizing that the door God closed was the very thing clouding your hearing. You couldn't hear Him through the noise of your plans. You couldn't feel Him through the comfort of your routines. But now, in the stillness, His whisper becomes unmistakable. He begins to remind you of who you are and who He's always been. Sometimes God will even let you lose people you depended on just so you can learn to depend on Him. When others walk out, He stays. When opportunities fade, He remains. That's His nature, unchanging, unwavering, unconditional. And once you taste that kind of closeness, nothing else compares. You realize that the doors you were begging God to open were never meant to be your fulfillment. They were temporary. But His presence is eternal. When you find it, you find rest. When you dwell in it, you find clarity. There's a depth of love that can only be discovered when you have nothing left but God. It's the kind of love that carries you when prayers go unanswered. It's the kind of peace that doesn't make sense to people who haven't been broken. You learn that intimacy with God doesn't erase pain, it transforms it. It turns your tears into worship and your waiting into wisdom. You begin to understand that His goal was never to make your life easy. It was to make your relationship with Him unshakable. And as you spend time with Him in that secret place, something begins to change inside you. Your desires shift, your prayers mature. You stop asking God to open doors for your comfort and start asking Him to open you for His glory. You no longer crave recognition. You crave revelation. You stop chasing success. You start chasing surrender. That's when the presence of God becomes your greatest treasure. You begin to walk in a quiet confidence that says, even if every door stays shut, I still have everything I need because I have Him. You see, intimacy with God is the place where striving ends. It's where questions lose their power and peace takes over. It's where your faith stops being about what you want and starts being about who He is. That's why God will sometimes close every other door, so you can rediscover the only door that matters. The door that leads into His presence. The door that doesn't require a key, only a surrendered heart. The door that never closes once you find it, because it was never locked to begin with. It was waiting for you to knock with honesty, with hunger, with humility. When you finally walk through that door, you realize that God didn't want to take things from you. He wanted to give you Himself. And in His presence, you find what you've been searching for all along. Not answers, not outcomes, but relationship. A relationship so real that even when doors close, you no longer panic, you rest. Because you know that if He is near, you're already where you need to be. Faith isn't built in moments of ease. It's forged in the silence between prayers and answers, between promises and fulfillment, between doors that once opened easily and doors that now refuse to budge. Every believer eventually walks through that hallway, the space where nothing seems to make sense. It's a place where God seems quiet, people don't understand you, and you're left standing before doors that used to swing open, now sealed shut. In those moments, something deep begins to stir in your spirit. You start to realize that faith isn't about walking through open doors. It's about standing still when none will open and trusting that God is still good. Every denied door becomes a test. Not a test to expose your weakness, but to refine your strength. God uses closed doors as classrooms for faith. He doesn't test you to watch you fail. He tests you so you can see what's really in your heart. When the blessing doesn't come when you expect it, when the job doesn't appear, when the healing seems delayed, He's asking you, will you still trust me? That's the question that defines faith. Anyone can worship when life is working, but real faith praises in the dark. Real faith stands when it doesn't make sense. Real faith keeps believing when the natural evidence screams that it's over. The testing of faith is never comfortable, but it's always necessary, because faith that's never tested can't be trusted. God allows the shaking to reveal what cannot be shaken. He allows disappointment to reveal where your hope truly lies. You see, we often put our faith in outcomes instead of in God Himself. We say we trust Him, but what we really trust is the plan we've made in His name. And when that plan falls apart, our faith crumbles because our foundation wasn't Him. It was the door we wanted Him to open. So He allows that door to close to bring our faith back to its rightful focus. He's not trying to destroy your confidence. He's trying to relocate it. From the door to the doorkeeper. Sometimes the greatest thing God can do for you is not give you what you want when you want it. Because faith that only believes when it receives isn't faith at all. It's transaction. True faith believes even when the answer is not yet. It trusts even when it can't trace. It holds on when everything else says, let go. The Bible says that Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness. But that belief was tested over years of waiting. God gave him a promise, then allowed decades of delay. Why? Because faith grows in the soil of patience. You can't microwave maturity. You can't rush divine timing. The waiting seasons are the proving grounds of faith. Every time God delays something, He's not denying you. He's developing you. He's making your roots go deeper so that when the blessing finally comes, you'll have the strength to hold it. Shallow faith collapses under weight, but tested faith carries glory. The Lord knows that if He gave you what you asked for too soon, it might crush you. So He waits. He tests your endurance, your humility, your obedience. Will you still serve when you can't see? Will you still worship when the answer doesn't come? Will you still walk when every door remains locked? That's where true faith is born, in the places where sight fails and trust must take over. When every door closes, you stand at a crossroads. You can choose frustration or formation. You can let the closed door harden your heart, or you can let it deepen your faith. The enemy will whisper, "God forgot you." But faith replies, "No, he's forming me." Because if the enemy can't destroy you, he'll try to discourage you. He'll try to convince you that a closed door means God's promise expired. But faith knows that the promise of God doesn't expire. It matures. It grows stronger under pressure. It shines brightest in darkness. Faith doesn't demand explanation. It rests in expectation. It knows that if God closed this door, he must have something better behind another one. The testing of your faith will often feel like contradiction. God says, "I'm with you." But everything around you says you're alone. He says, "You're blessed." But your circumstances look barren. He says, "You're healed." But your body still feels broken. That's when faith becomes warfare. You must choose whose voice you'll believe. The noise of the natural or the truth of the supernatural. Faith isn't denial of reality, it's defiance of fear. It stands on the word even when the world shakes. It believes that what God said is greater than what life shows. When God tests your faith, he's not doing it to see if you'll fail. He already knows your heart. He does it so that you can see what he's placed inside you. Every test reveals hidden strength. Every trial exposes dormant trust. Every closed door pushes you to pray a little longer, worship a little deeper, and believe a little stronger. And somewhere along the journey, you realize that the test was never about the door. It was about your dependence. You realize that the faith that once begged God to open doors has now learned to thank him for the ones he closed. Think of Job. Everything was taken from him. Family, wealth, health, every door slammed shut. But when the smoke cleared, Job's faith stood tall. He said, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." That's faith in its purest form, not built on blessings, but on belief. It's easy to say God is good when life is easy, but real power comes when you can declare his goodness while walking through ashes. God knew Job could handle the test, and that's why he allowed it. Your trials aren't signs of weakness. They're signs that heaven trusts you with endurance. Some of the most anointed people didn't find their faith on mountaintops. They found it in valleys where doors were shut, prayers were delayed, and silence was heavy. That's where you meet the God of the in-between. The God who doesn't just open doors, but walks with you in the hallway. He watches how you handle waiting. Will you worship or will you worry? Will you serve or will you sulk? How you respond to the test determines your readiness for the next level. God is not just preparing blessings for you. He's preparing you for the blessings. Faith is like muscle, it grows through resistance. Every time you face a closed door and choose to trust anyway, your spirit gets stronger. You start to move from emotional faith to enduring faith. Emotional faith says, "I believe when it feels good." Enduring faith says, "I believe because he's God." And that's the faith that moves mountains. That's the faith that survives storms. That's the faith that sees beyond the closed doors and knows that even the silence is part of his symphony. And though it hurts, though it confuses, though it stretches you, you begin to realize that these denied doors are divine training grounds. The pressure you feel is producing perseverance. The confusion you battle is cultivating clarity. The silence you endure is sharpening your sensitivity to his voice. You start to see that what the enemy meant to break your faith, God is using to build it. You begin to carry a quiet confidence that doesn't need to see to believe anymore. You just know, deep down, that he's working, that his word is true, that his promises are sure. Every time you face a closed door, remember that heaven is watching your response. The angels lean in, the enemy trembles, and God smiles when you say, "I still believe." Because faith doesn't need open doors to function, it just needs an open heart. Faith isn't proven by what you walk into, it's proven by what you walk through. And every denied door becomes another chapter in your testimony, another layer in your strength, another reason for heaven to say, "Well done, you trusted me even when you didn't see." There comes a time in life when you realize that not every path you walk was meant to take you where you thought you were going. Some roads look right in the beginning, they feel right, they even promise right, but they end in confusion. That's when God steps in and begins to close doors and reroute your steps. You may think He's breaking your plans, but He's really protecting your purpose. The Lord sees things you cannot. He knows what's waiting down every path, behind every opportunity, and inside every relationship. So when He removes a direction you thought was good, it's not because He's taking something away. It's because He's saving you from what you can't see yet. He removes the wrong paths not to punish you, but to reveal the right one that leads straight to His heart. When you start walking with God, you learn that His ways are not your ways. What you call disappointment, He calls deliverance. What you think is confusion, He calls correction. You see, you and I only see the next step, but God sees the entire journey. He knows where each decision will take you, where each door will lead, and how each path will shape your soul. Sometimes the direction that looks easiest is the one that will distract you most. So God, in His mercy, starts to shut doors that lead to detours. It hurts when He does it because we get attached to our plans. We build dreams around the doors that open, but God is not interested in giving you a comfortable path. He's interested in giving you a consecrated one. When God removes the wrong paths, He's not changing His mind. He's changing your direction. Think about Jonah. God told him to go to Nineveh, but Jonah chose his own route. He boarded a ship going the opposite way because the path God chose didn't appeal to his preference. And what happened? God sent a storm. Not because He was angry, but because He loved Jonah too much to let him drift off course. That storm was mercy disguised as chaos. It was God's way of saying, I'm not going to let you settle in the wrong direction. In the same way, sometimes the storms in your life are not meant to destroy you. They're meant to redirect you. The turbulence you feel is not a sign that God abandoned you. It's proof that He's guiding you back to where you belong. Every wrong path God removes brings clarity to your calling. Sometimes we pray for guidance, expecting God to draw us a map, but instead He starts erasing routes we wanted to take. We see that as loss, but heaven sees it as refinement. You see, clarity doesn't always come from addition. It comes from subtraction. God will start stripping away the unnecessary, closing the convenient, and blocking the appealing until all that's left is what's aligned with His will. He narrows your options to protect your obedience, because as long as you have too many choices, your heart will be tempted to wander. But when the wrong paths disappear, the right one becomes undeniable. The right path is often the one that requires the most trust. It's the one where you can't see the outcome, where you have to walk by faith instead of sight. That's why God removes the paths that depend on your understanding. He wants to bring you to a place where you stop leaning on what makes sense and start leaning on His Spirit. Every time you lose a path you thought you needed, you gain a deeper dependence on Him. That's when you begin to realize that divine direction is not about geography. It's about intimacy. It's less about where you're going and more about who you're becoming along the way. You may be in a season right now where doors are closing one after another. The career you planned is shifting. The relationships you depended on are ending. The stability you built is shaking. It feels like you're losing your way, but in truth, God is redirecting your steps. He's removing the paths that lead to distraction so that you can find the one that leads to destiny. He knows that if He doesn't shut those doors, you'll keep walking in circles. So He interrupts your direction not to confuse you, but to correct your course. You can't see the full picture yet, but He's already standing at the destination, calling you toward it. We often think we're lost because we don't see the next door. But God is not lost. He's leading. The path you're on might feel unfamiliar, but that's exactly where faith thrives. Remember Abraham. God told him to leave everything familiar and go to a land that He would show him. God didn't give him the map in advance. He gave him a promise. Go, He said, and I will show you. That's divine direction. You walk first, you trust first, and the clarity comes after obedience. Abraham didn't find his path by knowing it. He found it by following God's voice step by step. God's leading often feels like loss before it feels like progress. The wrong paths have to be cleared before the right one can be revealed. Sometimes the relationships that end, the jobs that fail, and the plans that collapse are all part of God's construction process. He can't build something new on top of something that's not meant for you. You cry over what you lost, But He rejoices because now He can begin what's truly yours. He's pruning your life so that the fruit can finally grow. Every cut is calculated, every removal is redemptive, and every shut door is an invitation to trust deeper. The challenge is that God rarely explains Himself while He's doing it. He just starts moving pieces, changing directions, and removing options. That's when your faith has to become greater than your frustration. You may not understand why the path you loved had to end, but faith says, if He closed it, He must have a reason. You don't need to see the full road to trust the one who built it. He's not only the author of your story, He's the navigator of your journey. And every reroute He orchestrates is leading you closer to purpose, not further from it. God's path often looks narrow because it's sacred. Not everyone can walk with you on it. That's why He sometimes separates you from people who were never meant to go where you're going. The path of purpose requires pruning. You can't take everyone with you, and you can't carry everything you used to depend on. He removes excess baggage so that you can move freely. The path that leads to Him demands focus. You can't afford to be distracted by what you've outgrown. What once felt like rejection from people may have been redirection from God. He's not cutting you off from blessings. He's connecting you to alignment. There are seasons where God will even let you walk down the wrong path for a while. Not because He approves of it, but because He's patient. He lets you experience the emptiness of your own direction so that when He brings you back, you'll never want to wander again. His grace allows detours, but His love brings correction. And when He does, it's not to shame you, it's to remind you that you're still His. Every closed door, every dead end, every reroute is a sign that His hand is still on your life. Eventually, when you look back, you'll see the divine pattern. You'll notice how every path that ended led you to another step closer to His plan. The wrong connections you lost made room for the right ones. The opportunities that vanished opened space for miracles you didn't expect. You'll realize that nothing was random, that every no had purpose, that every delay was direction. You'll see that God was never trying to take your dream. He was trying to take you deeper. Because the right path is not the one that looks easiest, it's the one that draws you closer to Him. There are moments in life when everything familiar falls apart, when the things you thought you could never live without are suddenly taken from you. You pray, you fight, you try to hold on, but no matter what you do, God allows it to slip through your fingers. It feels cruel, almost unbearable, and you start asking questions that echo in the silence of your soul. Why would God take this away from me? Why now? Why like this? But what you don't realize in that moment is that sometimes God takes everything because He wants to rebuild you from nothing. When He strips you of what you thought was essential, He's not punishing you. He's preparing you. He removes what's temporary so that He can establish what's eternal. He allows the ground beneath you to shake because He knows that only what's rooted in Him will remain standing after the storm. It's easy to worship when everything makes sense, when prayers are answered and doors are opening. But what happens when the prayers go unanswered, when the doors stay shut, and when every path seems blocked? That's when faith is tested, not in your comfort, but in your confusion. That's when you find out what your trust is built on. If it's built on blessings, it will crumble when blessings fade. But if it's built on belief, it will stand even when everything else falls. God sometimes allows a divine breaking so that your foundation can be rebuilt on something unshakable. He takes away your plan so that you'll finally surrender to His purpose. You thought you lost everything, but in reality, you were losing only what was never meant to last. When God starts to take things away, it often looks like loss to you. But in heaven's view, it's alignment. He's removing what's blocking your growth. Sometimes it's a relationship that no longer reflects your destiny. Sometimes it's a job that's keeping you in comfort instead of calling. Sometimes it's a dream that you built around your own strength instead of His will. And though it hurts, the removal is not rejection, it's redirection. You can't step into new seasons with old attachments. God knows that if He doesn't take it, you won't leave it. So He allows endings not because He's cruel, but because He's committed to your becoming. He breaks your plans before they break your purpose. Think about Job. One moment he had everything, wealth, health, family, reputation, and the next it was all gone. But even in his loss, Job said, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." That kind of faith is forged in fire. Job didn't understand what God was doing, but he trusted that God was still good. That's the level of surrender God wants from us. When he takes everything, it's not to leave you empty, but to show you that he is enough. The test of true faith is not how loud you can praise when you're full. It's how deeply you can trust when you're stripped bare. God sometimes removes all other support so that you finally discover that he was your foundation all along. Losing everything can feel like dying, but sometimes death is the beginning of resurrection. What you call the end, God calls the making. Before he multiplies, he breaks. Before he promotes, he prunes. Before he builds, he clears the ground. Every great man and woman of faith went through a season of divine emptiness. Moses lost his palace before he found his purpose. Joseph lost his freedom before he sat on the throne. David lost his peace before he became a king. Jesus himself was stripped, rejected, and broken before he rose in glory. So when God takes everything from you, he's not subtracting. He's setting the stage for multiplication. He removes what's lesser so that what's greater can rise. The pain of losing everything is real, and God never asks you to pretend it's not. He just asks you to trust that it's not the end of your story. You can cry, you can question, you can even feel angry, but don't give up. The tears you shed in your breaking are watering the soil for your breakthrough. Every time you feel like it's over, remember that emptiness is the place where God does his best work. When your hands are empty, your heart becomes available. When there's nothing left to hold, you finally start holding on to him. He's the only thing that cannot be taken, the only one who remains when everything else fades. There's something sacred about the season when God takes everything. It's where your faith stops being borrowed and starts becoming personal. When you have nothing left, you stop performing faith and start living it. You stop quoting verses to feel comforted and start breathing them to survive. You stop trying to control outcomes and start surrendering to process. That's where transformation happens. In the ashes of your old life, God doesn't rebuild with what's left, he rebuilds with what's real. He takes the broken pieces, the raw pain, the unspoken fears, and he starts shaping them into strength. What was once shattered becomes sacred because his hands were on it. Sometimes you don't realize how much you were carrying until God takes it all. The weight of people's approval, the pressure to perform, the illusion of control. It all crumbles when he allows a divine taking. But in that collapse, something beautiful begins to emerge. Peace. Peace that doesn't depend on outcomes. Peace that can't be shaken by loss. Peace that passes understanding because it's rooted in trust. You begin to see that the things you lost didn't define you, they distracted you. They were good, but they weren't God. And when he takes them away, he's not leaving you in ruins. He's making space for revelation. The wilderness after loss can feel endless. You wake up every day wondering how long it will last, how much more you can take, how many more pieces you can lose. But remember, even the wilderness is a classroom. God uses it to teach you that manna still falls, that water still flows from the rock, that his presence is still enough. When you have nothing else, you begin to see his provision in ways you never did before. You learn to depend on daily grace instead of monthly guarantees. You start realizing that survival isn't luck, it's mercy. Every breath becomes proof that he's not done with you. And though it's painful, one day you'll look back and see that the moment God took everything was the moment he gave you himself. You'll realize that the breaking didn't destroy you, it revealed you. It showed you who you are without the noise, without the masks, without the things that made you feel secure. It showed you that the God who takes is also the God who gives, the God who breaks is also the God who blesses, and the God who empties is also the God who fills. He didn't take everything to leave you barren. He took everything to plant something eternal inside you. Because sometimes the only way for God to rebuild your life is to first let it fall apart in his hands